by the Power of Grayskull.
When He-Man says, I have the power, it's saying to the kids, you don't have to do what you're told anymore. You can be your own person.
I got my first Masters toys on my 4th birthday. It was just love at first sight.
And suddenly, He-Man became, this billion-dollar empire.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 240. Available now on streaming and DVD is The Power of Grayskull, an informative and illuminating documentary that traces the Masters of the Universe franchise from toy line to a multi-brand pop culture phenom, featuring interviews with the many creative minds behind the toy line and cartoon to the likes of Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella. The Power of Grayskull is the ultimate resource for all things He-Man, and I'm happy to say joining me today is the film's directors Robert McCallum and Randall Lobb, who will be with us shortly. Robert, I thank you very much for joining me on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I love talking to Australian outfits, probably more than anywhere else in the world. They seem to get the type of movies we like to make.
And we love the movies that you do make. We were talking off air just now about how as soon as I saw the press release for this film, I knew I had to jump on it, watch it, and talk to you guys. And I'm so happy they took time out to talk to me today. I guess my first question is that, so you and Randall Lobb are doing this film together. He had that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles documentary from a couple of years ago. You yourself came off the Nintendo Quest series, which was very popular as well. How did you two guys get together, and why was it this project, the one that you both wanted to collaborate on and put out there to the masses?
Well, Turtle Power came out a year before Nintendo Quest. So just as I was wrapping up stuff on my end with that project, Turtle Power came out, and I just realized out of nowhere that it was by a group of filmmakers that live not too far from my hometown in Canada. So I thought, being the communal kind of guy, reach out, talk to them, hear their story, and see what they went through, because I thought it was a really cool concept, and I hadn't seen the film yet, but I was really excited, kind of like you when you discovered that this He-Man thing was out there. And so after a quick chat with Isaac, who's one of our producers on Power of Grayskull as well, it just seemed like there was a lot of synergy. We believe the same kind of things. We both like to make movies that celebrate stuff. And he said Mark and Randall were of the same ilk. And even in that first conversation, we only talked for an hour. I said, what? We need to do a He-Man documentary, just like your Turtle Power one. I'm a huge He-Man fan, just like you are a huge Turtle fan. Let's do the He-Man kind of version of this. And he hummed and hawed a bit, and the call ended and time went on. I got more and more the itch as Nintendo Quest finished, wrapped up, and premiered to kind of explore He-Man, because it was another one of my major favorite loves. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, those guys had kept coming across He-Man in their research, not only for Turtles, because a lot of the designers that worked on Turtles had come from the He-Man world, but also while they were doing their Conan the Barbarian documentary. So every turn, it seemed for them, it was like He-Man kept coming up, and the universe was saying, maybe this is another one that you guys should do. So after I made a cryptic post on Facebook about maybe dipping my toe into a He-Man documentary, Isaac called me back up and said, are you doing a He-Man documentary? Because if you are, maybe we should, start the superpower team up. And a couple calls later, we decided that's exactly what we were going to do.
So it was just like this perfect fusion of both you guys it was almost like an organic kind of thing where you're just drawn to each other. And also Randall, having interviewed a lot of these people before in his Turtle documentary, for yourself, it would have been good to have that resource to delve into in regards to the He-Man story.
Yeah, those guys really bring their deep dive look at stuff. It almost comes from an academic point of view, really dissecting, what makes the brand work and who are the key players in it. And they also have this great habit, I would say, of churning out really high-end material, which is a little bit different than some of the run-and-gun stuff that I'd been doing, because Nintendo Quest was really on the fly. It was a 30-day story, in and out of toy stores and game stores, non-stop all the time. So we didn't get the time to really do the setup and pretty shots. But I came with all the fandom for He-Man. So if they could harness my fandom and my passion for everything that made the brand great for 30 years, and I could work with their knowledge of how to kind of approach it from an intellectual kind of academic point of view with their high-end take on stuff, it seemed like it could only be a great meld of the two worlds.
I distinctly remember the first time I came across anything regards to He-Man. I must have been 5 years old. This was like 86. I was in my backyard and digging, playing in the dirt as kids do, and I unearthed a He-Man toy. It was beaten up, it had arms missing and such, but it was very distinct. And I was like, oh my god, what's this? And I had an older brother, that was his toy, he lost it a couple of years previous, and then he showed me the cartoon. And it's a thing that's really stuck with me, and I don't know why. Yourself, Robert, when it comes to He-Man and Masters of the Universe, do you have a distinct first memory of when you first came across the character or the cartoon?
Probably not a distinct memory because I was, only 3, 4, 5 years old max. I was probably around 4 years old when it first started kind of being a part of my routine. I remember distinctly watching it in my grandparents' basement, desperately waiting for Dukes of Hazzard to finish so that He-Man could come on. And I just loved the voices of all the different characters and the colorful world of the Filmation cartoon. And of course I had all the figures, so I'd usually be playing with Castle Grayskull that was always up on my bricked fireplace mantle in my grandparents' place and having my own battle. And then everything stopped when the show came on, and then I go back to playing my own stories and whatnot. And I really remember the episode, I believe it was Prince Adam No More, where Adam can't change into He-Man, and he's kind of with his father, King Randor, and they're trying to figure it out together to get out of Beastman's clutches. And it's kind of about that bond back and forth. And by the end of the episode, King Randor, actually for the first time in like the whole series, it seems, looks favorably upon his son, that they were able to get through together. Because of course, Adam, portrays himself as a slacker as to not draw attention to possibly be He-Man. So that episode and that feeling always stands out to me.
I always found it funny that he portrays himself in that way, but he still very much has the same physique before he turns into He-Man. And I think that's one of the first kind of things that really grabbed my attention in regards to that toy and watching that cartoon is the physique of the characters. Like He-Man is swole, he's huge, he's like a big kind of build kind of guy, which is different to everything else at that time. Something I wanted to ask you about, and I'll ask Randall about later as well, is that, and it wasn't really touched on in documentaries, how much do you think the Pumping Iron generation, I mean, that documentary came out a couple of years before He-Man was even like a toy line. How much do you think that kind of thing, that underground physique bodybuilding, mass bodybuilding kind of phenom that was happening, affected the way that the creators made He-Man, especially in regards to his look?
I think it was probably a really big influence. And I mean, look at all the stuff that comes out in the 80s, right? It is all about that male macho bravado, muscles and guns and explosions and testosterone everywhere. I mean, I think there's even interviews in the documentary where they talk about, the He-Man, what happened to the He-Man of the world, where they could go in and just do whatever they want. They had the muscles to do it. I mean, you look at the character, like you say, in the figure. I mean, he's just such a meaty figure, and that scale is almost never seen before. It hits the toy line and shelves with Masters of the Universe. It's, I think, very much a part of it. I think when Filmation came in, they started to tweak it a bit so that it was a little bit more acceptable, a little bit more aimed at kids, adding the wisdom and the kindness and the restraint of using the power instead of just being able to beat people up. So I think the muscles are clearly a big part of the evolution and the origins of it. And then where it goes after, I think, is to hamper it down a bit so it's not so in your face. But again, a name like He-Man, it's got to be a little bit tied to that.
And joining us now in the conversation is co-director Randall Lobb. Randall, you had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles documentary beforehand. Robert was talking to me about how he had just finished his Nintendo Quest documentary series as well, and then both of you guys come together. Interestingly though, the He-Man thing was more kind of like coming from Robert, saying you were working on the Conan the Barbarian documentary, which is something that will be coming out later as well. How was it that at that point you said, you know what, there's emerging interests here, because a lot of the people worked on Ninja Turtles, worked on the He-Man stuff as well. You had resources, you had access to people. How did it come about that, I'm going to work with this bloke who just did the Nintendo stuff and we're going to work together here?
Yeah, I was against doing a He-Man documentary at first, funny enough. It came to us through doing the Conan documentary, and we found 3 things. Now, Rob will remember the 3 things, I'm sure, because then he was the 4th thing. when Isaac and I were interviewing people, we were finding these He-Man things, these, what do you want to call them, emergent tidbits of information. So we're inside the Conan archives, we're pulling out material, and there's some kind of suit between Mattel and Conan Properties, and there's an argument about He-Man, and there's discussion about people going to see John Milius's Conan movie and saying, uh-oh, we can't do this. And then the second thing was interviewing William Stout, and he was talking about Conan, and then he said, well, oh yeah, here's my He-Man stuff. And Isaac looked at me. Number two, Isaac was keen the whole time. And the third time, we were interviewing Gary Goddard, who did the Conan live show at Universal, The Stunt Spectacular, and he, of course, did the film with Dolph Lundgren. And when we hit 3, Isaac said, okay, this is 3 things in a row. And I can't say how much longer it was that Rob psychically picked up on this information, and he reached out to Isaac, and I think, Rob, you correct me if I'm wrong, hey, I'm going to do a documentary on He-Man. And Isaac called me in a panic and said, oh my God.
Yeah, well, it was similar. I'd reached out because I just discovered Turtle Power, and I pitched Isaac without knowing him for more than a half hour that we should do a He-Man version like Turtle Power. And then about a year later, I had posted something about possibly dipping my toe into a He-Man documentary, and then he called you panicking.
Okay, there you go.
A question that Robert and I were just about to touch on, Randall, was that I was making the suggestion that our generation, or at least my generation, born early 80s, grown up in the 80s, were the kind of like the first generation to ride the first pop culture wave. And I think as a result of that, we are more attached to things, toys, games, comics, for example. There may be generations prior to that. Do you think that is a correct assessment on my end? And because of that, we are more open to documentaries like this that touch on those things, because these are things that very much mass media of that kind of scale, the cartoons, the toys, and then later movies as well, is something that evolved as we as children evolved as well.
Well, I think I'm a generation older than most of the He-Man fans. I don't know how old Rob is. I'm going to guess that he's a good 10 years younger than I am. And
yeah, I'm in the early 80s as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my generation, I agree with your supposition. Let's start there. Your generation was a generation that was inundated with pop culture messaging in a way that my generation was sort of maybe the mid stage of. And so we were given pop culture messaging, but without as much licensed material. And just the general conditions of, my older generation, action figures were feminized to our dads, or were evidence of feminizing toys to our dads. By the way, I disagree with that supposition. So a lot of the toys were sort of just not really super available. And as the 80s come along, economic things are changing, and there's a more consumerist structure, and kids of that generation are way more inundated. So I think the common culture of toys was enhanced. The idea that more kids had more stuff in general, and more of that stuff was licensed. And so you really were in the sweet spot. You had a lot of stuff happening. And remember, too, what year was it that those rules were changed around advertising, right? And toys. So prior to that, in 1981, I'm 16 years old. I'm out of the woods, and I've already sort of come out into what was happening then, maybe Blade Runner and Mad Max, Road Warrior, stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I sort of missed the fun in a sense. So coming into it from the outside, I agree with what you say. Maybe Rob has a different strategy or theory.
I mean, it really piggybacks off it. And for me, it starts with Star Wars and the consumerism and the whole collect them all mentality. And when studios and other companies see the power that IP can have with merchandising, which was largely just a very small category before Star Wars, So you can see how much it explodes. I completely agree. 1980 with Reagan coming in, changing advertising dynamics with merchandise. Now you can really push this stuff out there without getting slapped by the feds with selling to kids and pushing stuff on them. So it only made sense that there were billions of dollars to be made, and these companies were going to go after it as long as they had the IP, whether it's a show or a cartoon, to help be the vehicle to carry the toy sales.
If I could jump in again there too, something else hit me. I said that our dads, and by the way, I'm maybe speaking about small town dads in rural environments, guys who are born in the 40s and 30s. But I think too that by the time you're in your mid-teens in the 80s, if you're from a different generation, even toys seem like they're for kids. And the generation that you guys grew up in, it was always that toys were available for everyone. There wasn't quite as much of a stigma, and you were able to experience it without a lot of judgment potentially. And again, this is way more psychological than necessary, but I do see the effects of it. That, Rob, you think about when we were talking to like Paul Cleveland or Mark Ellis, they're very much product focused and very, it's my job to make these toys. And you talk to a different generation, Scott Neatlick, and it's, these toys are life.
Yeah, definitely. There's that certain dichotomy for sure.
And I think that these toys are life thing is something that really borrows heavily into why people like, for example, the Toy Story movies. There's something in there psychologically that a lot of people touch on. Randall, there's something I wanted to ask you that Robert and I talked about previously, and that is the look of the He-Man figures, that huge bodybuilding kind of look. And I asked Robert this question: how much do you think the pumping iron generation that the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger really ushered in kind of had an effect on the look of that? I mean, you're working on the Conan documentary as well. You have those comics, but there was this underground kind of phase, people going in the gym. Physique was a big thing at the time. Stallone was also coming into acclaim at that time. It was the body generation more than any other time before that. Do you think that had any type of effect on the design of these toys?
Man, that's really smart. I never thought of it quite like that, but that makes a lot of sense. You have definitely pumping iron is what, 77?
Yeah, around that time, yeah.
76, 77? Yeah, that makes sense. And First Blood came out 81, 82. Yep. And you're right, that he really looked different than he did in Rocky. And you're right, there's, I guess maybe without getting too dark here, steroids had maybe become more commonplace. And so there was a pop culture fetishism around muscles in a way. That's a smart observation. Geez, we should have put that in the doc.
Well, I tried to say when he asked me earlier, Rand, that Mark Taylor very specifically said, in the 60s and 70s, what happened to all the He-Men? What happened to that guy who could walk through the door in the bar with the jacked muscles who could take care of any problem? And those scenes are definitely in there. And you can see how the 80s is all about male bravado and machoism and testosterone, and the bigger the better, and size does matter.
And you see the difference. You look at Shane from the 50s. Alan Ladd is this tough guy for that generation, and he couldn't look less powerful than Arnold and Dolph and, Stallone. These guys are giants, comparably.
Next question I have for you guys is going behind the scenes of the cartoon specifically. It seems to me that there was very much a progressive kind of slant there, especially in regards to the female characters. At that time, female toys, for example, they were for three things only: to present fashion, to teach cooking, and to talk about mothering. It seems those are the three aspects in regards to that. But the Masters of the Universe thing, its female characters were warriors. She-Ra, for example, really personified a lot of that, and I think the new cartoon that's out now on Netflix really just touches into that even more. On one hand, you have He-Man, this kind of masculine thing, perhaps influenced by the bodybuilding generation. On the other hand, you have She-Ra. I think a lot of people don't really understand just how progressive it was behind the scenes, because there were also female directors doing a lot of those episodes as well.
Yeah, Gwen Wetzler was,
Go ahead, Rob.
Gwen Wetzler is just like an icon in my eyes. She won Emmys, the first woman director to win Emmys on Fat Albert. She was a Disney animator. So when she comes into Filmation, I'm sure she's bringing a lot of influence. And, you bring up He-Man and She-Ra. the female characters in the He-Man universe are just really strong. You know, Marlena, Adam's mom, is an exploring astronaut from another dimension who comes there. She's not hampered at home in the kitchen. Teela is captain of the guard, and even Evelyn, you know, is Skeletor's kind of right-hand go-to for creating all the mischief that they need. So while there might not be a ton of female characters in Masters of the Universe specifically, everyone is strong and nobody is basically undercutting them and putting them in stereotypical roles. And of course, you get to see that even more in She-Ra when there are a lot more female characters. And I think you really got to credit a lot of the writers as well as the directors.
And coming out of the 70s, you have some female designers and you have some female executives getting into positions of power at toy companies. And also, let's not forget that Mattel was a pretty strong female in its a strong female component in its founding. You have a partnership between a husband and wife. So I think Mattel at one point, for all that there were stereotyping lines or threads of stereotyping where through the early toys, and poor Barbie has done a lot of crappy jobs, you have women finally starting to say, okay, well, we need something else. We need something that reflects the other things that are happening in culture, like movies like Norma Ray, or just the way Jane Fonda's movies started to change. It's interesting.
It is very interesting. Randall, something I wanted to ask you is a theme that pops up persistently throughout the documentary is that of censorship, especially in regards to the creativity of the universe, the Masters of the Universe world. On one end, you have activist groups who were saying what a male character or a female character can and cannot do. On the other end, you have Mattel, who say that we need to sell these toys to kids, so the cartoon can't do this, the movie can't do that. Those kind of conflicting things that are happening there. How much do you think really hampered the evolution of Masters of the Universe as a franchise? Do you think that if those restraints weren't there, it could have flourished into something else that maybe could have evolved with the audience?
So, two things. The competition, I think, are happening at the same time. It's better to have guards up. It's better to have constraints sometimes for creativity, because it forces people to make decisions, you know, against whatever's working, you know, opposite to what they want to do. So if you're a writer and you can't show people doing, remember the line Barbara Hambly said, Robert, children may be moved to emulate.
Yeah.
Was the line. And you have then as a writer to really address, okay, what are we going to have? But the other side is, I don't think that the censorship is bad in its application. I think the censorship is bad when it's internally adopted. So if an outer group censors material coming out of a company or Mattel, let's say, that's one thing. It's probably fine because they'll find ways to get around it or to deal with it. But if the censorship is implemented from inside, then there is an impingement on creativity, and then they're not reacting against something, they're trying to do something. And I think that what happened with Masters, and again, Robert maybe would have a different vision on this, they started to go down a path where they were losing some R&D, or what was the reason for this to happen, or the thinking around it got sort of lazy or more corporatized. Fair?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, we hear from Mark Taylor, and one of the reasons he left is they kind of started to abandon the rules, and those guards about what made the universe great were no longer there. So they started doing anything and everything possible just to put the logo on a packaged figure that fit the line. And when you do that, it all becomes watered down, and it doesn't seem like it's part of it anymore.
So, Masters of the Universe... Go ahead, Randall.
I was just going to jump in there. Robert's perspective is interesting because he was a kid watching the show, probably not thinking about censorship, right? So his interaction with the show, the censorship becomes irrelevant. It's when the people making the show start to censor themselves that is the problem, in my estimation.
So you have a franchise that has succeeded in two different industries. You have the toys and you have TV. So naturally the leap is to movies. The problem is, as a lot of people pointed out in your documentaries, that the Masters of the Universe movie really seemed like a film that was made in the wrong generation. The special effects weren't there. And this was also back in the days when anything movie-wise that was connected to, say, a comic book property or anything pop culture-esque didn't really flourish. I mean, it was a couple of years until Batman would come out. Superman did something great in the late 70s, but nothing could really emulate that. Do you think this whole kind of Masters of the Universe, the movie experience, was just a case of, look, it was wrong place, wrong time, the technology wasn't there, and because of that, do you think that maybe the movie has been, or any idea of a future movie has been cursed because of the reaction to the original film?
I think it's kind of the opposite.
Robert, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I think the 87 movie has gone so far away from those initial reactions and what people think they remember. It's now become a beloved cult classic where people accept it, foibles and all. Sure, it might not have had the budget that it needed. Sure, they might not have been able to pull off the vision and all the way that we see films succeed now. But they're, like Randall was talking about with restrictions, there's some really nice things that happen because they couldn't do everything. And it honestly, there's a lot of examples in that film where other filmmakers since have taken the same kind of idea and put it in their films. You look at the final battle between Skeletor and He-Man that's done essentially in dark with flashes of light. Is that not exactly the same setup that George Lucas used in Attack of the Clones between Dooku and Anakin? It's all black, it's all flashes of light, you have no sense of set, and yet it works because it's just about the two characters having a chance to resolve their conflict. So yeah, it might be cheesy, but there's a lot of love in that cheesiness. And because it is love now, I think the stage can be set for a new movie without fears of, are we going to repeat our mistakes?
And if I was going to add to that, I would say, to me, it's not wrong place, wrong time. It's right place, wrong time, perhaps wrong. Gary Goddard, his name in the press now has had some tarnish on it, but he approached that movie like he's trying to make a great movie. And William Stout is trying to make a great movie. Frank Langella, like everyone's trying to make a great movie. But the auspices of the business end of it, above the creatives, I think they looked at it in a way that was just sort of like that idea I was giving you about action figures and such when I was a kid. That the idea that, these things are just silly and goofy and they don't have resonance. They're not real, so to speak. So this isn't a real movie. It's just a kid's movie. To me, that seems like that was in play to some degree.
And I think that anyone who saw that documentary on Canon Films as well saw that it wasn't the best kind of environment to make movies in as well. And that very much happened on that. So both of you delve into this world. What was it, if there was a thing or a few things that surprised you in regards to everything? And let me just put two of my own. Number one is Frank Langella talking about just how buff he was when he was making a Skeletor movie. That's number one. And number two is all the great artwork, all the great drafts and drawings that these creators showed us on screen. I really love watching the evolution of a character brought to life on the screen and just the different drafts and stuff. I think it was just fantastic. What was it like to be in a room with these artists as they're bringing out their original drafts of these characters? And was there anything that surprised you guys in regards to the evolution of this franchise when you were making a film about it?
Do you want me to open up there, Rob?
Yeah, go for it, Rand.
So one thing that hits me was you can look at the end result of a movie and you can say, oh, it was cheesy. I can tell you right now, nothing that the people did in prep was cheesy.
Yeah.
When you have Moebius and Richard Corbin and William Stout and Ron Cobb influencing William Stout, so like you have these really big names, people who are doing really excellent, really fine work. And you see William Stout's iterations, dude. They are shocking. The amount of detail, the amount of thought, the amount of research and technique that he would put into play to create something that later someone is going to laugh at and say cheesy frame. That's the biggest shock for me.
Yeah, I would have to kind of go along with the same degree that Randall's saying. I mean, I was really surprised because, again, I was a kid when this series came out. So to me, it's just these characters, and for people to kind of, disrespect the movies and other things that are coming out because it didn't hit the mark for them. But to see the work that goes into it and where they were trying to go with the vision and just basically set it up at the exact possible right tone, like it was just mind-blowing. I think other than William Stout's work on the film, the other stuff that I really liked was some of the stuff that we discussed with Martin Areola, who talks about all the different directions that He-Man was going to go before it went on the new adventures. They talked about He-Man in the military, He-Man, in space, of course, He-Man as kind of, a baseball guy or whatever. Like, they were really exploring a lot of those different directions for the brand to try to really revitalize it. And I had no idea that they were really that desperate to kind of figure out what He-Man could do instead of just sticking with the same theme. So that was interesting for me.
Final question for you both, and Randall, I'll ask you to answer it first. You are charged with relaunching Masters of the Universe for a new generation. Which avenue do you go down? Do you go down traditional road, new animated film with a toy line, or do you continue pressing on with a movie adaptation, which for a long time now has really struggled to get off the ground?
How did you know that I've been charged with this? Who's talking?
I spilled the beans.
The look, I'm not like some other people who are fans of these franchises. I love this line that Megan Casey said a line to me when we're doing another Turtles thing. She worked at Nickelodeon, now she's at Netflix. She's in charge of animation over there, a type of animation. And she said, everybody gets their own Turtles. And that's the power of the Turtles, is they can constantly reboot. And some old fan is going to go, yeah, those aren't my Turtles. But there's some kid who needs his or her own turtle. I'm a huge fan of revisionism. I like to see everybody's Batman. I want to see everybody's He-Man. If you told me that Sony went in a crazy direction and they had a surprising actor and they were taking what they felt was the spirit and the intention and sort of the key markers of that franchise and implementing them in a new way, I'd say that's interesting to me. I like that because we always have the old iterations available to our use. We can go back and participate with them and get that nostalgic feeling. Give me something new. I think that's fun.
What about yourself, Robert?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with Randall, and when I try to talk about this with people, I say, Randall loves the oddities, the strange things, the offshoot, that weird multiverse iteration that came out, and he kind of won me over looking at stuff like that. If you were looking for a direct pitch for Masters of the Universe, I would say that it needs to go animated. I think it needs to go comedy. I think Teen Titans Go is a really good example where you can take these colorful characters, play up the fact that they are very cartoon-like. You have a guy named He-Man who can come in and save the day at any point. I think it's the perfect kind of platform to really rejuvenate things. And again, everybody says Masters, for it to succeed, has to win over the kids, not the adults, because they've already got the adults. So why not try to get that new generation in?
It's a very good point.
Rob, I want to see that show. Rob, make that show.
Okay, I'm on it.
I'll be the first to watch.
Start this shit.
The documentary is Power of Grayskull, the definitive history of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. You can find information on their Facebook page, He-Man Documentary. There's also a website called heman.com. I saw the film on Netflix. It's available here in Netflix Australia. I'm pretty sure it's available in Netflix other regions. There's also a DVD release coming out September 3rd. And Randall, Rob and I were talking beforehand about how we very much like getting that physical copy. So I think for a lot of people out there, I think there's lots of interest in getting that physical copy. And I'm sure, are you yourself in the same way? I know we're in the era of streaming, but having that physical thing in your hand, I'm sure that's pretty much the way to go, isn't it?
Listen, I know Robert's already said this to you, and I know he's in full agreement with this based on, his model is, what about the collectors? Let's look at collecting and, in fact, bake the collecting into the show like Nintendo Quest. It's in the DNA of the idea behind what they're doing. If you don't show or play to or address or deal with the fetishism of collectors, you're missing the people you need to incentivize, because that's who acts as mavens online. That's how things get spread. Those are your best word of mouth people. I think, and I've had this argument with distributors, I think to forget about that group of people is to lose your hardcore flag wavers. You need to have collectibles.
Very, very well said. Randall Lobb, Robert McCallum, I thank you very much for taking time out to talk to me today. It's a terrific documentary. And again, congratulations to you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. And Rob, drive safely.